You're listening to the Coffee Hour. I'm Andy Bates. It's a technical Monday, so Sarah will join us when she's able to. Excuse me, as you can tell, we're having some technical difficulties today, but thanks be to God, we have what we have so we can continue to share with you the good news of Jesus here on KFUO. We'll get started with the Coffee Hour in just a moment. Thanks to Concordia University, Wisconsin for supporting the Coffee Hour. Find out more about Concordia University, Wisconsin at cuw.edu. Live Uncommon. It is time for Mental Health Monday with Deaconess Heidi Goehmann. Good morning, Heidi.
Good morning. Oh, goodness. I feel like we all just need deep breaths now after all the technical issues. You guys are holding strong. Good job, KFUO. Is it your birthday? Is it KFUO's birthday today? Is that
it
true?
Is.
Or is it today? Happy birthday, KFUO. That's so
Thank
exciting.
You. What are we? We're 90. What are we?
5, according to the ad.
95.
That's what 95. The ad said.
You know, when you get to a certain age, sometimes you don't remember things.
Right. Oh, good times. Oh. Mental Health Monday is only less than a year old, I think. I should find out our birthday for that, but
I've lost track.
Yeah. We are young.
Oh, well, I'm so glad that we could all be here. I could use a good Mental Health Monday today, so we're continuing our conversation about, and Sarah's here now, yay.
Yes, I am.
So we can continue our conversation. We're talking about identity, I believe, and when I read the notes for today, it said episode 3, but I read it as epic 3, so today needs to be epic.
Epic. Oh, no epic pressure.
3.
No pressure.
No pressure.
Epic 3 about identity. You know, it's interesting because I really think identity is like a hinge in the whole development picture. So we've talked about building trust and attachment. We've talked about autonomy and exploration and our sense of curiosity. And in the new year, we're going to move on to some of the ideas about building legacy in those later stages of development. But identity is something that is really like the core of development. And so it is kind of epic in that sense that it really encompasses the whole of development within this single component of it, if you will. Does that help, Andy? Does that make it a little bit more epic for you?
Very, very. Yes.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Thank you.
So today we're going to talk about asking questions that help develop identity and help develop our sense of identity, if you will, because as we've talked about in this series, our core identity as Christians is child of God. And honestly, even for unbelievers, to know that you're created by the God of the universe makes such an impact on your mental health, on the way you live and move within this world with empathy and compassion for humankind, for one another, as well as yourself. And so that's one reason we want people to know the gospel, is so that they can know that, number one, they're created by the God who loves them, the Father, that they're saved, that their salvation is secure, that they're no longer fighting for their worth in Christ Jesus. And so I think this conversation about identity comes up so often in our lives if we're open to it. And then that's such a great place for people to hear the gospel and how God has changed our view of ourselves and our view of our walk in this life as well. And so we're going to talk about one layer of questions that's kind of simple for having open spaces in our own lives for contemplation, but also others when we sit at a coffee shop, when we sit around the table at dinner time. Evidently, I only do identity questioning during food. I'm trying to think of other times. But even in our Sunday school classrooms, right? Anytime we're talking online with someone, all those places. And so, oh, goodness gracious. So we're going to go there. I know. And then we're going to also in the second half go into a second layer of questions that help us probe a little deeper into identity. And those questions might be reserved for more intimate relationships. We want to make sure we give people the ability to say no thank you to answering our questions if they're not in the place where they want to wrestle with things. But we also want to be able to be comfortable with our own answers to these questions, our own identity, and really comfortable in our own wrestling with identity so that the people around us can feel like they can do the same in our midst. And so Oh, one of the best gifts we can give one another is these spaces for asking big identity questions. I think our culture really has this vantage point where you should just know who you are. Good luck with that. It's that idea that we are these people who should be confident and successful and strong and just know. And so we're always a little concerned about presenting our vulnerability of wrestling with identity. I think the church, on the other hand, hopefully can be a place where we don't offer that same kind of sense of judgment about identity. Unfortunately, it's full of sinners. We all are sinners, but I do think we can do better at this, especially if we want to be able to meet our young adults, people of any age struggling with identity questions within our culture, especially sexual identity, gender identity, vocational questions, things like that. I don't think we've positioned ourselves very well in the church in order to be a space where people can ask those questions. But where would we rather have them ask them? In the church or outside the church? I think that's a big piece of that puzzle. So the layer one questions. Who does Jesus say I am? Again, this is the core. We can tell ourselves all kinds of things about ourselves, positive, negative, in between, middle of the road, but asking ourselves the question in a forthright manner, who does Jesus say I am, causes us to run to the scriptures and find out. We need to know more about him in order to find out more about ourselves. And so I think that question is a really important first start. Do I believe who Jesus says I am? This is hard. That's another layer of that. It is one thing to read who God says I am. And like we've talked about before, the book of Isaiah is really great with identity. The books of Timothy, both books of Timothy, Titus, all have these really identity grounded concepts on who God says we are and what our purposes are here. But it can be really hard to believe at times. And that's okay. But we return to asking ourselves, do I believe that? Okay, maybe I don't in this moment. And I admit that before God. I confess it and I ask him to bring the knowledge of his restoration into my life. And only through that honesty, I think, can the light of his truth come to us. So what things are getting in the way of believing who Jesus says I am? Is it some toxic relationships that I have around me that tell me other things? Is it that I'm not reading the word and that's a barrier because I don't know where to even go to find who Jesus says I am? Is it that I feel disconnected and I haven't found those places and those people who can encourage me and cheer me on and help me ask these questions for myself? So that's a really important one. Identifying the barriers is not shame-filled, you guys. It's so easy to look at these things and say, oh my goodness, I'm such a mess. And the truth is, yeah, God loves messes though. He's here for that. He sent the incarnate child of God for your mess. And so we can lay that before him. So the last two for that, before the Andy and Sarah question, are who do I want to be beyond a child of God? I think it's everybody's favorite segment, by the way, is the Andy and Sarah question. Who do I want to be beyond a child of God? I know, right? So this one goes into that whole thumbprint idea that we've talked about, where, yes, at our core, we are a child of God, redeemed by Christ, but he also made unique details about each of us. This is very Psalm 139. He knows us in our deepest places. He knows our thoughts. He knows our desires. He knows Heidi Goehmann. He doesn't just know a blanket of child of God. He knows those deeper things about us as well. And so that helps us dive into a little bit more about our unique identity that God has created us to be. And the last one for this is who gets a say in influencing who I am? Who gets a say in influencing who I am? And that's an important one because, again, it's just so easy to be influenced by the people around us, the kind of conversations that are in our day, especially when we go to workplaces, if you will. Sometimes those are really great environments. Sometimes they're not very supportive environments. Sometimes our family are those places that are great environments and sometimes not supportive environments. So just being aware of that. Whose opinion do you want to listen to? That's a big piece of what I learned in Song of Songs when I studied for my book, Altogether Beautiful, that it's so easy. Everything about this sense of self, this body image to emotions to all the other things about who Heidi is very easily influenced by who gets to say who Heidi is. And, at the core, it's between me and God, but it's not that simple, is it? So, Andy and Sarah, who was someone in your early life who helped you wrestle with these questions of identity? And I did put a parentheses, whether overtly or as an identity ninja, because sometimes these people are in our lives and it's not like really obvious at the time that they're helping us, uncover who we are, but their influence is so helpful and so important. So who helped you in your early life?
I really wish that I could point to an identity ninja because I think that title is just super awesome. And maybe some of these people are. I think I have to point out a group of people if that's allowable in this question.
Oh, absolutely.
My Lutheran grade school teachers, I think as a group, really helped shape. And I think that's part of the reason why Lutheran schools are so important, because they have that opportunity to shape children. But I know three in particular, my fourth grade teacher, Mrs. Foreman, my music teacher, Mrs. Inkerberg, and my eighth grade teacher, Mrs. Martin. The three of them, I think in particular, really helped me wrestle with these things and also just who I was as a person, especially as you get into those, preteen years, life gets a little weird a lot of the time. And so they really helped me through these questions in particular.
That's really awesome, Sarah. And you pointed out really well even that the core, I keep saying the word core today. It's like the only word I have for this, I guess. I'm not very creative on a Monday morning. I haven't had enough coffee. The core of the identity work is preteen and teen years. We will see it return throughout our lives. We'll see pieces of it when we're younger, of course, but that is a really important age. And those Lutheran teachers, man, they really make an impact. I'm so thankful for them.
Me too.
How about you, Andy?
I like all that Lutheran teacher name drop in there, Sarah. Good job.
I know. You're welcome.
It was the Hall of Fame in Sarah Gilsa's life of Lutheran education.
I wrote them down so I wouldn't forget on the spot.
I like I like the idea of an identity ninja. Maybe that's hashtag goals in life there. If you want to be an identity ninja. So I went to public school. Up until I went to Concordia University, River Forest, now Concordia University, Chicago. So, but I had some really awesome teachers in public school that I didn't really know much about them. At that time, there was, and even today, still in that area, in that community, there's a pretty fine line, or pretty definite line drawn between personal life and school life for students and teachers. As in the Lutheran school where my son goes to school, like, we're friends with the teachers and we know everybody's lives. But learning more about my teachers later on, I learned that one of my teachers in eighth grade had specifically placed me next to another student because he thought that I would be helpful to them because they had some special needs. And so he placed me next to them and thought that I would be just a very helpful friend, a helper in a sense, that I would be a good personality next to him. And being one who likes to serve in helping vocations, later on realized how that was very influencing in who I am and my identity. I would also say the same of my middle school PE coach as well. I was not like the star athlete. And I think I probably shared this before here on True Confessions. I mean, the Mental Health Monday segments. I'm not a star athlete in middle school by any means. But my PE coach, who actually was a former professional, I believe he played baseball professionally. Anyway, he always accepted what I brought to the table, and was very encouraging and supportive of whatever I presented as a student, and trying to be an athlete. Whatever I presented, he was very supportive of that, even in the middle of middle school, where you're surrounded by, especially middle school boys PE, surrounded by everybody trying to prove that they're the best at some sport. And so he was, and I found out later on that he was a Christian, and that was certainly what motivated him, and how he interacted with his students was his faith in Christ. So those two, and because of that, I think I was able to take on some, not necessarily sports, but other athletic type things that I enjoy, instead of just thinking I don't enjoy sports in general. So.
Yeah, I think that person that you were just talking about for PE in particular is that kind of identity ninja kind of person. They're not walking up to you and saying, who does Jesus say you are? How do you feel about your identity today? But instead, they're creating these spaces that are available for you to ask questions, and also to feel good about yourself within honesty. I think that identity ninjas, especially, they're full of truth. They're not letting us wallow, if you will, in our belief that we are just the best at everything, but they're helping us grow and helping us uncover what is our skills, what is our weaknesses that we can work on, and all of that good stuff. And so that's a really good example. I also went to public school, but I would say my identity ninja, looking back, I think a lot of times you see it looking back, is my confirmation pastor, Pastor Fraker. He's in Texas, and his wife as well, Sharon. They just always invited me in and gave me a safe place to ask all of the identity questions. And wow, man, that makes a difference.
Lord willing, we're going to record the second half here and share it on the podcast today. So if technology all works today, we'll share the second half of the coffee hour on our podcast at kfuo.org. Thanks so much for being here this morning for the coffee hour. I'm Andy Bates.
I'm Sarah Golseth.
You're a miracle. You know that, right? A living, breathing, one-of-a-kind miracle. You were created to stand apart, to share your gifts in the service of others, to make an uncommon impact in a common world. And at Concordia University, it's our mission to help you do that, to live uncommon. To learn more about Concordia, go to cuw.edu.
Welcome back to the coffee hour. I'm Andy Bates.
I'm Sarah Golseth.
It's Mental Health Monday and also Technical Monday. So you get the second half of the coffee hour here on the podcast today. So thanks so much if you're joining us now on the podcast. If you were listening to the live program and now joining us for the rest of the podcast, we are talking with Deaconess Heidi Goehmann for Mental Health Monday. And in the first segment, Heidi, you were sharing with us your identity story and who were the influencers or the identity ninjas in your life. And you'd mentioned your confirmation pastor and his wife and how they were so influential in your identity and in shaping, I guess, who you are. Is that how I would say it?
I think having, again, that the identity ninja, it's like the space of people in your life who allow space for you to ask the questions. Gosh, it is Technical Monday. Like, it's Technical Monday also for my words. Like, they're not coming out correctly. Identity ninjas create space for us to ask these questions in our life. And I think that's what they did. Also, we were not entirely regular churchgoers, even while we were not regular churchgoers to some extent. It depends on what you call regular. And so I think I never received a sense of judgment or like a lesser than from people who were super involved in the church and did all these things. Instead, there was just always this invitation. And when I was ornery and had a million questions in confirmation and was very angry that women couldn't be pastors and that we had doctrines I didn't understand, my pastor not only set some boundaries, which I think is important for a preteen, but he invited me to come and have a snack and ask more questions privately with him and with his family and things like that. And so that makes a huge influence instead of treating me like my questions were silly or just letting them go. So yeah, it's funny to reflect on the people, especially as Sarah pointed out, and then I think you pointed out too, Andy, those middle school years, those teenage years. Who are the people in your life who are doing that identity ninja work alongside of you? So then that brings us to our next segment, which is some deeper questions for probing a little deeper into identity with one another. And I think the point of these questions is that we need them for ourselves. But again, also, I think the work of identity is kind of constant in our lives, but we don't know the questions to ask ourselves. We don't even know how to wrestle with it, especially if we're a little disconnected from the word or it hasn't been something that's been a part of our life all the time. Or if we haven't had a lot of non-judgmental spaces to do this work in our families or in our places and spaces like our schools and things like that. So the layer 2 questions include, what questions do you have about your identity in this season of life? And so I like this question because it recognizes that we aren't always wrestling with the same thing. When I became a mother, that opened the identity can of worms like nobody's business. When I found out that there wasn't a call for me to be a deaconess when my husband got his call from the seminary, that opened up the identity can of worms again. And so different seasons of our lives will bring different identity cans of worms. Health problems will do this, as we've talked about before with allergies and different diagnoses and things. That will cause you to wrestle with your place before God, who He is in your life, but it will also cause you to ask a lot of questions about yourself. I think part of that is because in our world, when we find something major with ourselves, we tend to make it our identity. And so that's a little problematic, right? Mm-hmm. I don't think you want to be seen as only the person with allergies. That's not your goal. But it can be really easy to do that because you want to find these supportive communities. You want to find things to help yourself. And you want to feel better about this kind of broken thing in your life. And so we vacillate toward making that so much a part of ourselves that we can get into a really unhealthy space. And this is one thing that happens with sexual and gender identity. We let one thing about ourselves define our whole selves, and that's not a healthy place to be. Instead, we want to look at our whole selves and who God says all of us, as in our single self, is. So another question is, what difference does who I am make on where I spend my time and who I spend my time with, as well as what I spend my time doing? So basically, the connection between identity and time, what is reflected in how I spend that gift of time, how I steward it. So often we recognize one thing as really important to our individual identity, our details about ourselves, but we might not spend any time on it. And then that we feel that disconnection internally, and it can be difficult on our identity processing. A couple more would be, oh goodness, what curiosity is God building in you about yourself and your place in the world? And so this kind of goes back to those early autonomy and exploration questions. But what makes you curious can kind of unravel, untwist up some of those identity things for us. And that can be really helpful. The last one I have is, who has God put before you to walk alongside you in the work of wrestling and understanding themselves deeper? So we, like everything else, understand things within relationship. That's the way we were created. Not only our relationship with God, the Father, Son, and Spirit, but also our relationship with one another. So when we sit with someone to help them unravel their identity, we learn things about ourselves. So asking yourselves, who around me is wrestling with identity, and stating it out loud, those people are the people who will help you reflect then deeper on your own identity and help you understand what there is to learn about yourself. So my Andy and Sarah question for this section is, who in your life helps you wrestle with these questions now? We talked about our early life, but who has God put in your life today that helps you, whether overtly or as an identity ninja? Or the second half of that question, I think, is what spaces allow you to ask questions and to further understand your identity? Because both those things are important, both the people and then also those non-judgmental spaces. So who wants to go first?
So my number one person on that list in my life now would be my husband, because I am a very verbal processor. And so
sorry, I shouldn't laugh. That's not right.
It is.
So he's also kind, very kind.
Yes, he's a very patient man. So I have struggled with probably nearly every one of these deeper questions in the last 4 years. Just because of all of these life changes that happened all at once. And so I mean, my brain is constantly working, but then it also ends up coming out of my mouth too. So I process through all of these questions verbally, and he's the person that's around me most often. So he gets to listen to all of this. And
because no one can be around anybody right now.
Right.
It's true.
Exactly. So he, but he does help me work through these things and focuses my path and my attention to appropriate places to really wrestle with these things and think through them. Also my best friend, who I'm not around at all because she doesn't live here, but Facebook Messenger is a wonderful thing. And we have had so many conversations back and forth on both ends for both of us wrestling with vocation. And that has been a huge blessing for me, for sure. And then the second part of your question, the space, this might be a little weird, but the Lutheran Ladies Lounge on Facebook has been huge for me and for several other women who are in there. But to have this place to talk about stuff and to ask questions and to be virtually, quote unquote, with other women who have these same beliefs about vocation and about our doctrine and Lutheran beliefs, to be able to kind of have a sounding board has been a really wonderful thing. And having our like behind the scenes chat with the three other hosts, they have been wonderful when I'm struggling through some really crazy, like, somebody's mean to me on Facebook and I don't know who I am anymore. Those kind of questions. They've been really great with talking me through those kind of things too.
I really appreciate your honesty in that, especially with social media, because it is a great place to do some of this wrestling. And it's also a little bit of a difficult place.
Yeah.
No, a lot of a difficult place sometimes, because it feels like such a representation of who we are that we can really feel that identity wrestling come up inside of us. And so that's a really, really good point. And we'll talk about that more next week when we talk about the benefits of wrestling with identity together. I'm pretty sure social media is going to come up in that one. So how about you, Andy, before we run out of time?
Both, yeah, my wife as well, in terms of the things that we share as especially in being parents together too, questions that just naturally come up when understanding your identity and also helping your child understand their identity. And especially the question earlier about, or the point about what makes you curious, and just trying to watch that in my son. But I would say also, particularly for me, I would say my trail brothers, those who I run trails with, that's where we have a lot of really good conversations that are very thought-provoking and deep. And it's also, you really have to get it in just a few words, because when you're breathing that hard because you're running up hills, you try to pack in, the most meaning into the fewest words.
That is a really good point, which I could always benefit from. People who help me speak in slower, like a slower speed. Those are usually good identity ninjas. And then also people who help me get it out in fewer words. I like that. That's good. Good tip. Good tip for identity today.
Well, and I think also with all the oxygen flowing, that sort of thing, I think my brain's working better at that point too. Maybe. I don't know.
Good times. Good times. Well, and you can see, you also mentioned then a space essentially on the trail, that's a different space. And I hadn't really thought about any place like that being outside. I think you're right. When I'm hiking, these identity questions are kind of coming up very naturally for me. The deeper conversations are happening. Ooh, I love that. Good job, Creator God, right? Having those first article presence of God with the second article work of Jesus Christ in us. That's awesome. That's a really good way to wrap this up today, I think. And just a reminder that, again, Isaiah, really great book to turn to for identity. I wrote He Calls Me Loved, which is a study of Isaiah. And people even write in the reviews sometimes like, maybe this should be called the study of identity in Isaiah. And I'm like, well, that could be true. It's all about the different things that God calls over us, the titles he gives us. There's a lot of names of God in scripture, but guess what? God does the same to us. And he tells us who we are very clearly in some ways. In other ways, he leaves up to the wrestling, if you will.
Wrestling. I like that. I think wrestling is an important word to use here because so often many assume that the Christian life is about things that are, when you're a Christian, it's just going to be easy or the answers are going to be there. But we know that's not it. There's that tentatio. There's that constant wrestling of learning more about who we are as God's children and to one another. So great stuff. Good content today. That's very helpful to me. And maybe I should go run a trail now. So dig a little deeper. You're listening to Mental Health Monday on the Coffee Hour. Thanks so much, Heidi, for being with us today.
Thanks. Looking forward to next week.
I'm Andy Bates.
I'm Sarah Gulseth.
The Coffee Hour with Andy and Sarah is a production of KFUO. To support the Coffee Hour and KFUO Radio, visit KFUO.org. You can also text KFUO to 41444 or send an email to gifts@KFUO.org. And you can call us at 800-844-0524. KFUO. Christ for you, anytime, anywhere.